Good afternoon and welcome to the HL7 Da Vinci Community Roundtable. Today's session is a year of active implementation, HL7 Da Vinci Project year-end review and 2024 plans. My name is Alix Goss and it is my pleasure to moderate today's Community Roundtable and to remind all of us that we engage in these forums under HL7's antitrust policies to ensure appropriate collaboration and information sharing. We are grateful for your participation in the final Community Roundtable of 2023. Today's session, an off-cycle date, enables us to efficiently bring together our Da Vinci membership and industry colleagues to review this year's program accomplishments and set the stage for 2024. We will also discuss regulatory influences and alignment with industry efforts to support scaling FHIR-based exchanges in value-based care. We'll hear from Hans Buitendijk, HL7 Da Vinci Project Steering Committee Vice Chair and Senior Director, Interoperability Strategy at Oracle Health. Crystal Kallem, Project Manager, HL7 Da Vinci Project, and Senior Consultant at Point of Care Partners. Jocelyn Keegan, Program Manager, HL7 Da Vinci Project, and HIR Practice Lead for the Point of Care Partners community. We've included time to take audience questions. Please use the question function in the GoToWebinar platform throughout today's event to submit your questions. So let's go ahead and dive in. We'll post the recording of today's webinar and slides on Da Vinci's video presentation page on Confluence. Da Vinci's communication lead, Leslie Amoros, will be posting links in the chat box to assist in locating that page and other resources you may find of interest. We have muted lines to aid our quality of our recording. Should you encounter audio issues, we suggest you rejoin the webinar or obtain the audio by dialing in using the number provided in your registration. Finally, we appreciate your survey feedback solicited at the conclusion of today's webinar. Our next community roundtable, is January 24th, 2024. Please note that we're working on shifting our meeting platform and registration may look a little different next year. In regards to events, I'd like to highlight some industry events as well as HL7 events in the coming days and months. For industry events, ONC is returning to an in-person annual meeting next week, next Thursday and Friday. For those of you who are not able to attend in person, please be aware that there are virtual sessions that you can participate in on Thursday and Friday morning, as well as the end of the day Thursday. So take a look at the link and chime in for the virtual options. VIVE 2024 is meeting in Los Angeles at the end of February. And at HIMSS 24, the week of March 11th, they'll be in Orlando and you'll be able to see the Da Vinci community there as well. For the HL7 events, the FHIR Connect-a-thon in January is being held January 16th to the 18th. It is a virtual event with the early bird rate ending Monday, December 11th. That's just next around the corner. A little bit more time to register for the January working group meeting for the early bird registration, which for that event ends on January 5th. The working group meeting is at the end of January. It is also a virtual event on Universal Time, not Eastern, as it's often been, or West Coast. I'd like to now invite our first presenter, Hans, to come on screen and to walk us through his remarks on demonstrating FHIR-based approach, bringing value.
Thank you, Alex, and welcome everybody to this session today. I appreciate everybody joining. Looking forward to questions and discussion. Unfortunately, Kirk could not make it today. So hence that I'm standing in today to provide a couple of introductory remarks. And we'd like to start with looking back a little bit. It's only a couple of weeks until it's the end of the year already, and look at some of the accomplishments from Da Vinci. We effectively have continued the strong work that has been going on from when we started and now where we are. And everybody should have received either directly you individually or somebody in your organization who receives the the invoices, operating committee, or already looking at it at Confluence as well, a letter that highlights a number of the accomplishment that we have. And this diagram, this chart is really interesting to highlight in that regard when we look back on how far we have come. It feels like only a couple of years ago that we are at point zero. We started, we looked at a variety of opportunities where we could enhance the interaction between providers and payers and vice versa. And now look at where we are. We have a number of organizations that across the spectrum, bar one, that have adopted one or more of our capabilities out there. So we have for each one of them a number of our members that have gone all the way in adopting it, and a number of them already actively live. That's fantastic in the short number of years that this initiative started, when you look at what is necessary to make it happen. There are a number of organizations that are adopting, and then there are quite a few that are planning to adopt as well. So all across the spectrum, but particularly looking at the blue and the orangey color, substantial amount of progress that has been made that really came together in 2023. So we currently have about 8 publishing updates that have been accomplished, and quite a few ballot processes that are in flight, being planned for otherwise. And there is a good amount of commitment to make this happen, and it continues to grow. You see that if we look at these kind of charts year over year on what is being achieved and accomplished. At the same point in time, we see that the number of members is growing as well, and that we're actively looking at how we can appropriately extend that. We have done things for members, not only in terms of the value of the publications, the ability to therefore adopt, but also financially, that we have addressed the fees. We have identified opportunities to take advantage of the surplus that we have. And the combination of everything, looking at the success that the organization represents, the situation that we're in financially, with the support that we have in kind, contracted otherwise, we have quite a bit of interest to join and adopt what we have delivered. So really need to be proud of what we have achieved to date, and particularly in the last year. And part of that is that also this is being driven by regulations, regulatory alignment, supporting opportunities where we need to provide these capabilities. So when we're going to look forward into 2024 and look at what's ahead of us, regulatory is one of the key elements that we are going to be influenced by, to either advance what we have, to learn, improve otherwise. And these are just some of the examples where this may come from. ONC, we have a rule, HTI1, that for providers will provide quite a bit of capabilities that they need to advance, that tap into our use cases as well. Expansion of FHIR US core, support of a larger set of UCDI. So you see a lot of focus in that from a FHIR adoption perspective, and how it can tap into that. All driven increasingly by USCDI to set the scope for what needs to be supported. And we see in there that it's not limited to a general set of data, but what do we need for public health? What do we need to do for research? What do we need to do for quality measures, etc., which are all going to impact the ability and the opportunity to share more data over time. CMS clearly standing in the middle here. Everybody waiting for the final rule to drop there, and see how much of what they have proposed actually makes it in the rule, where topics like prior authorization are critical, and other advancements in the communication between payers and patients, payers and providers. So a lot of activity that rules are again driving what's happening. New topics that are being discussed in NCVHS. We have TEFCA, that is the result of 21st Century Cures Act, voluntary program, but trying to see how can we scale how can we advance and using a national network beyond what we currently are doing, where we have further opportunities to look at that. And lastly on this slide, but certainly not lastly on the list of impacts, WEDI and how it can address some of the topics and how it helps focus in areas where we need to advance as well. So I think what we see here is that generally, which is understandable for interoperability, where we need to have many different parties talk the same language, where we are have a minimum set of capabilities that everybody can support, and leaving a lot of room available as well to grow, to explore, to find new things. Might not be the same all the time, but that we can learn from, but then continuously raise the bar of what we can exchange, what is relevant across many different stakeholders, that we should all do the same. And the combination of, when we look at what we have done in 2023, what we can expect in 2024, and what continues to be a progression that we're on, I think we can look back and say we've been quite successful at getting how far we are, starting to make an impact in actual production, and we are looking at a path that will keep us busy for a little while, and understandably so, because the data that we have covered so far is still only a part of the variety of data exchanges that are relevant, that can benefit from improvements. So today we're going to dive a little bit deeper in some of these aspects, and appreciate any of the discussion questions that are going to come up. Thank you again for a fantastic year. Looking forward to 2024, and going to, as a result, pass it on to the next topic to start our drill down and conversation today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hans. Jocelyn, you're up next.
Awesome. I'm really excited to be here, and thanks, Hans, for pitch hitting for Kirk. I've been really fortunate from a program perspective to have amazing support from our executive leadership, really from the very beginning of the project, and in the outputs and sort of the topics that you could hear Hans discussing, I think are proof point of the commitment. If you can actually flip to the next slide. I always like to share sort of the membership and where we're headed with this community, because I think that it's a testament to the fact that, and you guys hear me say this all the time, right? This is a human-powered effort. The speed at which we've been able to impact change, and everybody's sort of starting from a different place inside their organizations, or are focused on different use case areas. But the individuals that sit inside of your organizations, both these member organizations and the community at large that's joining us today and daily on our calls, is allowing us to work, I think, at a much faster pace. We continue to work on expanding and solidifying that base of membership. We've been very fortunate, I think, and to Hans's point, I think people see high value in participating and sponsoring the project. We actually have queued up a handful of new members for 2024, so I just want to be able to give them a shout out we had about 5 members joining in 2023, and we had some consolidation and some mergers that mushed down our numbers a little bit. So we're still sort of operating in the 50s. But I want to remind folks, we kept the project artificially small, really, in those early days, and that really our focus has been to broadening out the base and making sure that the program is sustainable and that these work for these IGs is sustainable. So we actually added a partner of Availity as a sponsored member, Baptist Health, just in the last month. Highmark and their engine business is joining as well. We don't have their logo yet. We're still working through that. These are all pretty recent memberships joining in 2024. Health Gorilla is actually agreed to join the program and support some of our early work. As you heard Hans talking about TEFCA, and I think we'll touch on a little bit later, sort of what does that TEFCA FHIR roadmap look like. eHealth Exchange has joined. They actually joined this fall, sort of gangbusters, really, on looking at those network FHIR examples. How can we really get scale from a program perspective? I'm really excited to have Blue Shield California to join, especially given some of the regulatory activity that's happening out on the West Coast around the use of FHIR. And we have many other organizations that are queued up. If I didn't mention organization, it just means we haven't gotten your signed SOU yet. But we'll continue to look to round out what we think are gaps and holes in the membership, and again, continuing to sort of solidify that base, and where we have the opportunity to sort of, I would say, continue to be very conservative in how we use member dollars, to make sure that the project is sustainable, but that where we can bring relief to each of the member layers, I think that's important, and we'll touch on that in a couple of slides. If you can flip to the next slide. Yep, Crystal, or Alex, sorry, whoever's flipping slides for me. So I want to talk a little bit about the program and where we've come from, because I think that, there's been sort of cyclicality to the way that we've worked. And, when we look at the work product, right, all of those guides that are sort of in flight and that moved, many of them moved through a publish or a ballot process this year, the level of engagement, sort of deep, I like to think of each of the use case areas really as a community that we're building. And it's this community that's going to be doing this work for the next 20 or 30 years. And I think this is important because I think each of us has a role to be building the people and bringing folks from our organizations to get this work done. And I think we're seeing, right, given, and Alex is going to do a deeper dive into the regulatory activities that impact and are a factor around Da Vinci. But I think that, what we're seeing is not just activity at the federal level, but also at the state level, reinforcing, I think that this group of individual organizations that are moving ahead of the industry and really driving forward how we're going to work, and reinforcing and providing that really important alignment. I think that we've also shown, that there is a role, and we now have a series of accelerators, right, beyond Da Vinci and Karen and Argonaut, that this consensus-built implementation guide is important, that there is a need for us to create and support the testing tools to be able to validate that, and that there's a role for people to have that test bed of reference implementations, so people have something to be able to validate that they're actually compliant with the guide. The demonstrations that are happening in the market, and I like to use sort of the very sophisticated phrase of, it's like stupid silly, some of the data points that are coming back from some of our early adopters, of just the time that people are saving and the speed at which we're getting patients to the services that they need, by using automation, right? None of this is controversial conceptually, but just the data points. For example, I've watched Heidi Kriz and Anna Taylor from Regents and Multicare collectively present probably half a dozen times this year. And every time they present, as they're getting further and further into their production use of prior authorization, the numbers of the time being saved by the provider side, right, by the folks on Anna's team, that literally are reducing like 80% of the things they even need to get prior auth on, right, because they're seeing transparently the patient's benefits, right, to understand what data is really needed and if they need a prior authorization, and then that ability when a prior auth is needed, how much of it can be automated because the data is at rest in the EHR. I think that I've heard Anna talk about it being the magic button, and her teams basically of nurses that are doing this work saying, hey, how do I do all of these, with a magic button? I think that there's that it's palpable, I think, for us. And then the reuse component, sort of the once I've stood up that FHIR server, how fast it is for me to be able to reuse that same set of services for different use cases, for different implementation guides. And I think the Providence team is a great example of that. They've been really forward FHIR in general, and they've picked up CDACs and the attribution guides. And I'm highlighting these guys because they've presented publicly for us and they're out in the open. But I can, assure you there's dozens more organizations that are just steps behind these guys. And it's really impressive to see all of this hard work that we've done go into use. So if we think about where we're headed next year, I think that, we know there's a bolus of people coming at us, right, from an implementation standpoint, that have been sort of waiting to figure out when the regs are going to drop, when are they going to have to do something. We're going to continue to try and figure out how to get in-kind leadership and be lean from a program perspective and help drive down the cost of the program so we can do more with the resources that we have. And we've continued to do that year over year. And I say we're all holding our breath to see how much we're going to enjoy Christmas. Or whether or not we're going to see stuff in January, but we're readying, and we'll talk about this a little bit in the Q&A, sort of the role I think that we've fallen into of being able to speak as Da Vinci, right, of this really complex group of, partner organizations that have come together to try and solve these problems, how can we speak and help lead the industry when NPRMs and final rules do drop with this sort of shared knowledge and sort of, I'd say, as I affectionately refer to us, as the party of the willing that really want to solve these business problems. And then I think that, depending on where membership leads and, some of the big problems I think that we're trying to solve or that are getting sort of layered as we build these implementation guides, there's probably 2 or 3 more work areas I think that we'll dive into next year, but we're going to be driven by the members to do that. So I'm going to flip to one more slide, just for folks that haven't been paying attention on a day-to-day basis and aren't Da Vinci members today. As I mentioned before, we actually drove down the top 2 layer prices for Da Vinci over the last year. So this is our first year, and we've been, as Hans heard, we've been burning down to some reserves that we had created, and hope to burn down through those and bring up the membership right to be able to accommodate the price breaks that we brought in. But we're going to continue to look for voices. We want independent provider voices. We're looking for large to medium-sized multi-specialty practices that either want to implement through their EHR. We want to add some of the smaller EHRs to the program and get them involved either as implementers or community members, ideally from a member perspective to have a voice at the table. And we've been actively talking to, smaller regional Medicare, Medicaid plans. I don't think you think about Blue Shield California as being a small plan, but they certainly are a regional plan, right? When we think about the impacts of state regulation and having those voices at the table, as well as our plans that operate in multiple states. And then you heard, I think both Hans and I referenced this impact of, what does it really look like to have the QNs at the table helping to drive what a network version of some of these use cases look like. And we're excited to see some proof of concepts coming from members, I think the next couple cycles, right, of Connect-a-thon and activities. We're open at all points in time, to send a message to the PMO if you're not a member right now and you want to get more involved. We're more than happy to help you sort of articulate the value props of being involved in the program more closely. The team is here to support that. So just reach out if you're interested, if you're not a member. And if you are a member and you have sponsored seats you're not using, or you're a provider or a smaller organization that maybe can't fund joining Da Vinci, we're always happy to talk to people about how to leverage those sponsored seats so that we can get sort of that full voice set of voices at the table. So with that, I'm going to wrap up and hand it off to Crystal, and she's going to do a deeper dive into the actual use case work that we did this year.
Great, thanks, Jocelyn. Next slide, please. So this slide is one that many of you have probably seen before, but it's really rich in information, and we actively update it on a regular basis. So here, this slide applies the readiness scale to each of our Da Vinci implementation guides to provide kind of an overall status at a glance. These colors represent the overall maturity of each of our implementation guides, and the dials represent progress toward a phase in the project, such as its progress in a current balloting cycle or publishing cycle. And then the asterisks and diamonds next to each of or certain implementation guides represent support or alignment with the existing or expected federal regulation. So this slide is really meant to serve as an organizing construct to help the community at large and our members clearly see the status and progress of the program and understand where each of the implementation guides stands as it progresses through the standards development and adoption process. So this has been recently updated with some of the new progress updates that we'll talk about today. Next slide. So it's hard to believe, as Jocelyn mentioned, that 2023 is almost over, and each year we compile a roadmap to keep our community informed of plans for the year and share progress updates throughout the year. And we have accomplished a lot this year. I'll talk a bit more about these various items in subsequent slides, but in summary, as Hans mentioned, we published actually 6 implementation guides officially, but 2 more are finalized and ready to go. They've been approved and they're just waiting to officially hit the site and be officially published. So 8 implementation guides this year. We've balloted 4 implementation guides this year, 2 in January, 1 in May, and 1 in September. We completed a discovery project for postable remittance this year with plans to launch it as a project, public-facing project in 2024. And our Da Vinci community actively participated in testing activities during 3 HL7 Connectathons this year and the CMS HL7 Virtual Connectathon, holding 7 tracks during each of these events. Throughout the year, we also work with the industry to provide education and support collaboration to drive innovation and provide feedback during key industry events, including VIVE and HIMSS and other industry events that are important for the industry at large. Next slide, please. So we recently conducted community roundtable sessions where we did a deeper dive into each of our use cases. And I just wanted to mention that the patient cost transparency use case was covered in depth during our September community roundtable. And it included an overview of the No Surprises Act law and the benefits of testing and implementing the PCT implementation guide. And in October, during our October community roundtable, we provided an overview of all of our other Da Vinci use cases, including a deeper dive into our burden reduction, clinical data exchange, payer data exchange use cases, plus an overview of our foundational assets. So I want to remind folks of this and encourage you to take time to review those recordings. They're relatively recent, and they'll provide you with a better understanding of all of the Da Vinci use cases and how they work. Next slide. So I'm going to take a few moments here to summarize some of our accomplishments for 2023 for each of our use cases and offer a glimpse into where we're headed for 2024. First up, the Clinical Data Exchange Implementation Guide. This is a utility tool that can be used across our Da Vinci use cases and supports the exchange of clinical data generated by providers to share with payers or other providers. We published STU2 in March of this year, and recent updates included requesting and sending attachments for both unsolicited and solicited submissions, and adding a FHIR-based approach for requesting attachments. Our CDEX team hosted a track at all of our Connectathons this past year and produced a functioning reference implementation that aligns with the most recent published updates for our IG. So we've recently seen an uptick in testers, which has been creating great momentum as we move into 2024. And in addition, our CDEX community has spent some time this year identifying information categories to inform CDEX examples and creating a starter set of exemplar CDEX examples for implementation and use. The Payer Data Exchange Implementation Guide enables health plans to share key clinical information and patient history with patients and other payers. STU2, this is one of our guides that is nearing publication. It's any day now. Our goal is to get it published before the end of the year, and there are a lot of interest and momentum here, especially as a result of the proposed regulations. So our community has been focused on continued testing and has been documenting requirements for future enhancements to PDEX, which will include some of the pieces related to payer-provider bulk data exchange and payer-to-payer bulk API. The primary focus in 2024 for these two implementation guides will be testing and implementer support. CDEX is evaluating the need for potential updates to closely align with the recent published prior authorization support implementation guide, and is evaluating the possibility to expand the submit attachments use case beyond the claims and prior authorization processing. And PDEX is focused on enhancements that support alignment with the final rule when we see that come out, and some of the other items that I mentioned. Next slide, please. Next up, PDEX has two companion implementation guides. So the PDEX formulary was published in August of STU2 was published in August of 2022, and this guide enables payers to share estimated drug costs and information to consumer applications. And our PDEX Directory Plan Net implementation guide, which was published in 2022 as well, enables patients to more easily understand which providers, facilities, and pharmacies are in the network covered by their current or future plans. These two implementation guides have been out for a while now, so this year has really been focused on implementer support and testing. We initiated monthly review of implementer feedback and issue tickets and have identified some needed enhancements to the guides based on that feedback. We are in the process of applying some technical corrections to formulary STU1 and STU2, and we anticipate that an STU update will take place for PlanNet in 2024 to incorporate some of that implementer feedback and alignment with the recent updates to the FAST National Healthcare Directory Implementation Guide. Again, continued testing of these two implementation guides is a focus, and just continued support for our implementer community. Burden reduction contains three implementation guides that work together. We have the coverage requirements discovery that allows providers to determine if there are documentation or prior authorization requirements for an item, service, or referral. The documentation templates and rules implementation guide, which facilitates the capture of information from the EHR to meet payer documentation standards using a FHIR questionnaire to automatically populate the questionnaire from the patient's record. And the prior authorization support implementation guide, which standardizes the exchange of a prior authorization request and associated documentation between the provider and the payer. We have officially published all three of these burden reduction implementation guides, and this was a huge undertaking, and we want to congratulate the burden reduction community for their hard work. In addition, the burden reduction community has been actively testing these three guides, serving as a shining example of how the implementer community can come together and collaborate and partner with each other. In addition to engaging in our standing public calls for burden reduction, the implementer community has dedicated time and resources to continuously meet on a weekly basis to prepare for each upcoming testing event. And it has really shown through their testing activities. So in 2024, we plan to continue this level of testing and provide increased emphasis on implementer support through education and supportive tools and resources. And in addition, when the final regulations are available, we will evaluate potential gaps and needed enhancements, along with any industry feedback from early adopters. This may result in an STU update, and any new content would be balloted as soon as it is reasonable to do so. Next slide, please. The patient cost transparency use case is another implementation guide that we've been very focused on in 2023. PCT STU1 implementation guide was published in March of this year. And since this publication, the community has been focused on testing and gathering requirements for STU2. To support these efforts, the PCT community is forming a PCT Tiger team to discuss the good faith estimates and the process to coordinate with other providers and facilities, a requirement of the No Surprises Act. And in 2024, the PCT community will focus on balloting STU2 and continue testing activities through a testing pilot aimed at engaging a broader community of stakeholders in this effort. Next slide. With regard to our quality and risk implementation guides, the Data Exchange for Quality Measures, or DEQM IG, provides a framework to enable automatic data collection and submission in support of value-based data exchange. This is our most mature implementation guide, and the community is continuing to drive progress and adoption here. So STU4 was balloted in January of this year and subsequently published in October. And they're already planning to ballot STU5 in May of 2024. The risk adjustment IG provides the ability to better inform providers of opportunities to address chronic conditions and enable payers to communicate risk adjustment information. So STU2 of the risk adjustment implementation guide was balloted in May of this year, and this group has made great progress on testing and developing a reference implementation. And these efforts, along with ballot comments, and are informing an update to the IG, which they plan to publish in early of 2024. So although, oh, sorry, and then the value-based performance reporting implementation guide is a fairly new use case that was launched last fall. It's focused on standardization of payer-generated cost performance reports, which are crucial for health systems and providers to track and manage performance on value-based contracts. The first version of this implementation guide was balloted in September of this year, and the team is actually targeting publication of this guide as early as first quarter of 2024. The VBPR team has held its first round of testing in May of this year, and they continue to build out reference implementations and test. So they're making great progress in quick time and are very enthusiastic and demonstrating great progress. Next slide. Lastly, our foundational assets. The implementation guides in this category are cross-cutting and often referred to as tools in our Da Vinci toolbox that can support a variety of use cases. And HREX was originally, the Health Record Exchange implementation guide was originally published in 2022, and it serves as a foundational guide for all of our Da Vinci IGs. It defines FHIR profiles, operations, and guidance that are relevant across our use cases. So HREX was always expected to evolve as additional shared content needs were identified through development and testing activities of our other Da Vinci use cases. So in 2024, we anticipate the need to enhance HREX to incorporate commonalities from our other Da Vinci implementation guides and to align with newer versions of US Core, pending regulatory requirements, and enhancing the IG based on implementer feedback. So stay tuned for more activities on HREX in the upcoming year. Member attribution provides trading partners with the ability to establish, validate, and maintain a list of shared members. We recently balloted STU2 in January of this year, and these most recent updates support reconciliation of patient lists and to add and remove members. This recent update is being very actively used and actively tested in our community. We've been updating the reference implementation to align with STU2 for member attribution, and that should be available in time for the January Connect-a-thon. So we're very excited about the progress there. The notifications IG has been out for quite some time. It was published in 2020, and this guide defines a framework for real-time exchange of alerts. Several of our members have leveraged this utility IG across early adoption FHIR projects, and we've received some feedback from these folks and plan to do an STU update after the first of the year. We've been also assessing how this implementation guide aligns with the Direct Trust Event Notifications IG to support compliance with CMS ADT conditions of participation. So as a result, our team has conducted a mapping between the Da Vinci IG and the Direct Trust IG to provide some guidance on how to represent the same elements in the Da Vinci notification FHIR profiles. So we're working now to obtain feedback from the community about the use of the Direct Trust IG in production and whether these mappings would be useful for the community. So stay tuned for more work in that area, and we hope to do an STU update in early 2024. Lastly, one of our newest use cases in this category is postable remittance. It was launched as a discovery project in February of this year and is exploring the excessive time and effort spent by payers and provider organizations to obtain remits. We're very excited to see the broad interest, participation, and support of this effort. There were over 30 Da Vinci members who attended discovery calls. And so this use case will be launched as a new project in the coming year with a plan to create and ballot an implementation guide in 2024. Next slide. So as we move into 2024, We've said several tangible actions for our community of stakeholders. Take some time to visit and review our Da Vinci in Action interactive Confluence page. This page provides self-reported information from our Da Vinci community on who has implemented or plans to implement our various Da Vinci implementation guides. It provides a great opportunity to identify other organizations to partner with as well. We encourage you to participate in our weekly standing public conference calls. This is where you can ask questions, provide feedback on our implementation guides, and help us improve the guides over time. So please take time to do that, and then help us test. We strongly encourage you to join us and participate in connectathons and other testing events to really advance our guides and identify what's working and what's not. So please join us for that. And if you ever have questions about how to participate, let us know. And on that note, next slide, the HL7 Virtual FHIR Connectathon is coming up in January, which Alix mentioned in her opening remarks. Registration is open. That early bird rate goes through December 11th. And we really want folks to register early so that you can identify which tracks you're wanting to participate in. That gives us time to really reach out to you and coordinate in advance of these events. Make sure you're prepared and that the other participants are prepared. There is a participant information session on December 12th. Our tracks are currently holding all of their track kickoffs. So there's lots of opportunity to engage now and prepare yourself for the event in January. Next slide. And lastly, in preparation for the Connectathon, there are a good number of resources that are available. The FHIR Basics recorded webinar provides an overview of FHIR, and it helps walk you through how to read an implementation guide, provides some basic foundational information on the US core profiles and some of the testing tools that are available. So we strongly encourage you to take a look at these resources. And again, reach out if you need any support in preparing for these events. I'll now turn it back to Alix.
Thank you very much, Crystal. I'm going to go ahead and advance my own slides here. I'm going to talk about the regulatory response and alignment opportunities as a setup for our panel discussion today. So please make sure you get your questions in that you've been holding or ones that may still emerge. From a regulatory response and alignment perspective, I really want to kick this off with, recognizing that, as many of us know, interoperability is a team sport. The sport takes shape in multiple ways. For example, the HL7 lifecycle and the FAST ecosystem representation showed on this slide. Da Vinci has its own version of a life cycle that is interwoven with the life cycle of others because we operate in a multi-threaded world. Bringing together numerous standards, policies, and business approaches is at the core of achieving interoperability and to do so at scale. Our presenters so far have spoken to the Da Vinci Project specifics, and I'd like to touch upon a few regulatory response and alignment opportunities as a setup for the panel, and to highlight the regulatory landscape, complexities, and opportunities we will face, as well as encouraging members of the healthcare village to continue to influence and participate as we scale health IT interoperability. There are multiple regulations and interaction points in the federal landscape. I'll just touch upon a few selected examples to highlight key changes afoot and related opportunities for us to influence the regulatory landscape based on our day in, day out experiences in the healthcare ecosystem. Federal advisory groups provide an influencing opportunity by those who sit on the committees and by those who present or offer public comment into the advisory committee efforts. For clarity for those who are not steeped in federal advisory committee land, the National Committee on Vital and Health Statistics, or NCVHS, created in 1949, has a long history of advising the Secretary of HHS as specified by various laws, and also routinely reports to Congress on HIPAA's administrative simplification provisions related to standards and privacy. HITAC, Health Information Technology Advisory Committee, created in 2016, is the re-envisioned Federal Advisory Committee created by the 21st Century Cures Act, and more on that in a moment. Last week, NCVHS held a full committee meeting to finalize their recommendations to strengthening the HIPAA security rule. They also hosted presentations and discussions, including the Office of the National Coordinator, the National Standards Group, CAQH Core's Voluntary Certification Program, and 3 accredited standards development organizations, Health Level 7, National Council for Prescription Drug Programs, and X12. The goal being to receive commentary on standards advancement and certification paradigms, followed by a deep dive into cost, value, and standards compatibility issues in our HIPAA landscape. This was a great backdrop to NCVHS's discussion of work plans for the coming year that includes a joint effort between 2 of their subcommittees, Privacy, Confidentiality, and Security Subcommittee and the Standards Committee. This joint work effort will build on their predictability roadmap efforts and related work with ONC's HITAC to address the intersection of clinical and administrative data trajectory, which we saw referenced in CMS 0057 proposed rule. HITAC and NCVHS collaboration blossomed under 21st Century Cures provisions. HITAC's body of work is extensive in providing support to ONC in fulfilling their broad scope of responsibilities. As you may all be aware, and some may not, ONC is the principal federal entity charged with coordination of nationwide efforts to implement and use the most advanced health IT and the electronic exchange of health information. HITAC recently advanced recommendations on pharmacy interoperability and emerging therapeutics and provided commentary on proposed rules such as HTI-1 and interoperability standards such as the United States Core Data for Interoperability, or USCDI. As we await the highly anticipated HTI-1 and CMS 0057 rules, many are already working on their feedback to the information blocking proposals for disincentives for providers, or the NCVHS request for information on ICD-11 code set adoption considerations. Also, we eagerly await the HTI-2 proposed rule. We anticipate focusing heavily on patient engagement, information sharing, and public health interoperability. From the Da Vinci point of view, we work collaboratively with our members and partners to thoughtfully prepare input to advance the federal policy frameworks while also iterating our specifications in alignment with business needs and federal policy objectives. For example, 0057 is expected to be a significant game changer as it builds on CMS interoperability and patient access final rule to reduce burden by enhancing access to data and its exchange between patients, providers, and payers, and the respective combinations of information sharing among those 3. When 0057 drops, we'll assess it with a focus on the linkages to the HL7 specifications and determine the alignment and clarification opportunities. Further, we'll identify educational areas and industry collaborations to assist our collective industry-wide effort to comply and more broadly advance the value of information exchange technology capabilities in delivering timely and efficient patient care. Let's now pivot from the national effort being just a part of our shifting landscape to the states as they are leaning into standardization at a faster pace than ever. A few examples to highlight include the state efforts tied to prior authorization, clinical data exchange, and patient transparency. Washington State has a law that establishes requirements for their prior authorization processes related to the timeframes for decisions, electronic authorizations, standards, and communication requirements for various entities. Its provisions take effect over the next several years, impacting response times and requiring the use of HL7 FHIR APIs. For example, as of January 2024, health plans must respond with a determination to electronic PA requests for prescription drugs or healthcare services within 3 days or 1 day, calendar day, for urgent requests. Non-electronic requests are also included in the legislation language and must be responded to within 5 calendar days for non-urgent requests and 2 days for calendar days for urgent ones. Massachusetts, along with others, are actively considering prior authorization legislation, including the use of FHIR standards. Time will tell if CMS's final rule 0057 will slow down the state efforts, or perhaps it will set a baseline for states to refine. Utah is also advancing their clinical data exchange-based capabilities in their proposed rule with a heavy emphasis on the use of FHIR. Another state trendsetter, California, in 2021 adopted a law requiring certain entities to exchange or provide access to data in real time that takes effect next month. California's AB 133 law also factors in alignment with federal electronic health information policies. The law included provisions for stakeholder advisory groups to inform their state data exchange framework and create a physician order for life-sustaining treatment, or POLST, e-registry. The patient transparency rules are gaining traction with data and cost transparency and sharing policies, with 6 laws adopted so far and 2 of them referencing FHIR. But these are just a few examples highlighting the potential variability at the state level alongside federal rules that will bring additional challenges to entities that operate in multiple states. It underscores the need to collaborate in the standards and policy development efforts to connect those frameworks with the expectations in your day in, day out reality experience in delivering and paying for patient care and supporting community well-being while reducing burden and inefficiencies in the overall system. With that backdrop, I'd like to shift into our panel discussion and invite Hans and Jocelyn to come on screen. And I've teed up some questions for them, but let's take a moment and see if there's anything that Jocelyn wants to jump in on before I start asking my questions.
Well, I'll say we had an unsolicited question from one of the members about what we were doing about CQL. So I promised that we were going to dive into that as part of our discussion. Awesome. And then I had another question that came in around whether we're aware of the uptake in the use of the attribution use case by EHRs and other third-party data handlers. And I would suffice it to say, and we'll unpack this a little bit as we talk about sort of the opportunities and what we're seeing sort of as, you know, highlights and challenges for adopters in the industry is, you know, I think ATR attribution for folks who don't live and breathe Da Vinci on a day-to-day basis is really this really fantastic utility IG that we developed similar to notifications, that it's always sort of surprising to us that we just stumble across people picking up and using it. And what we have found, depending on where people are in their implementation journey, is once people get sort of like shovel ready, are working with that first partner, something like member matching is one of the first sort of barriers, like consent, like data rights agreements, you know, whether something falls under payment and operations or not, are some of those initial conversations. And so ATR keeps getting picked up and reused, I'd say in new and novel and expected ways faster. But we're really cautious when we talk from a PMO perspective about only sharing and disclosing folks that have volunteered to share what they're doing publicly. So I'm more than happy to do matchmaking behind the scenes for folks, but the folks that we'll talk about sort of generally are the ones that are either actively leading or participating. And we generally don't share unless we've been sort of given permission to talk publicly or someone's posted out publicly that they're actively participating or implementing one of the guides. So.
Well, thank you for clearing that. And I really want to take this opportunity as I dive into my first question to have the audience keep in mind that Jocelyn and Hans have very broad and deep industry experience. And so we've talked about Da Vinci specific so far. Now I'm going to ask them to take a wider angle view to talk more broadly about adoption, scaling, and community challenges and related needs. So the first question I'd like to ask is of Hans. With your high-tech leader and EHR market leader points of view, how do you see the regulations supporting industry alignment to harness the power of API interoperability at scale to improve patient care?
Now, thank you for that question. It's an interesting one because On the one hand, you frequently would like to say is that we should be able to achieve things without having a rule behind us to get it done. But when you talk about interoperability, where we need to have many different parties aligned at the same point in time to talk the same way to each other, consistent language otherwise, is that we've seen just by experience, it's very hard to do that by just natural evolution and let it happen in the market. It happens in some places where there are very limited parties that can effectively set the standard, but otherwise it doesn't happen, or they're not doing it by regulation. It's just the volume of participants. In healthcare, there are so many different parties that need to be aligned that it's hard to find a way by which we can get to that point of alignment and get the progress that we need to make without regulation. It becomes at that point in time much more a balance of we have to be careful that regulation is not asking too much in too short a period of time, that it's realistic, that it does not create a situation where it locks itself into a particular version and doesn't allow for innovation. So it is a tricky balance that we always have to be careful about. But it is interesting that there is that need to put us all together in the same box, if you will, and sort this out. And I think that's the place where you see, where we have seen, where you continue to see, where we will continue to see it for a long period of time, to help make that happen, where we collectively can say, this is a good foundation that everybody needs, and yet still have the ability to expand on it, do other things, try to find better ways, and that over time we can then adjust and change to say what's now the best thing to do that. Because we all have the same need. Patient data at the core needs to be exchanged from one provider to the next, to the payer, to the public health, to whatever else. And we all need to look at that same data and interpret it the same way. Otherwise, it's not comparable, it's not usable, it is hard to adjust. That's where I think that regulations will it's not just a support in a sense, but it's also a driving and guiding and assuring direction. But it better be based on the community's ability to adopt and involvement to make that happen.
I think it's a really great point, and I appreciated Steve Posnak's call out last week at NCVHS, recognizing Da Vinci as being proactive in trying to get that marriage and synergy working, because so much of the industry, especially since we adopted HIPAA in 1996 to 2003, depending upon which part you want to point to, we've become very trained to be reactive, which leads me into my next question to Jocelyn, with shifting to your consultant and project manager recovery point of view. What are you seeing as the opportunities and challenges to garnering value from APIs that implementers may encounter as they navigate their own marrying of business priorities with those federal regulations?
Right. I think that Hans is spot on, right, of sort of what the role is that the regs inevitably play because of the complexities around U.S. healthcare. And we all know, right, there are things that get stalled and momentum that gets killed if expected regs don't happen, because people don't want to act ahead of the regs and build something that's not quite in the right direction. So I think we've got this really interesting opportunity and sort of bubble that we've created. You know, again, Da Vinci didn't develop this on our own. We really model ourselves very heavily after Argonaut and other industry projects. But this idea of like, there's this captive audience of people that are ready to go ahead and to drive where industry is happening. And I think people have been able to leverage this move towards APIs and this need to get to more real-time data interactions and develop the patterns, right? Because FHIR does one thing for us, right? Which is give us a common nomenclature and move us to this more real-time interaction. But it also requires, I think, an important aspect here, which is these early adopters are helping to set the recipes about how this is going to work. And so I have seen, and we get to see, right, in the world that we live in on a day-to-day basis, the folks that are really willing to lean in and help drive and define what those workflows are going to be and how they're going to work, and, you know, take advantage of sort of the benefit of this sort of like group pooling of some paid resource mixed with the subject matter experts from individual organizations to really make sure that what we're building is fit for purpose. And I think it's been really unique to watch, right? I think that to Hans's, point about we can't move faster than the industry is ready to move, but we know that there's people that are at the front end of sort of some of these, convoys ready to go faster than maybe the laggards. And because of this regulatory pattern we've been in, the laggards were really sort of holding everybody back for a really long time from an industry perspective. So I think it's allowing us to sort of remove the ceiling and allow people to operate above that floor, I think, which is really important. And we're seeing that, right? You heard, Crystal talking about the fact that, we have basically non-stop sort of a testing mode going on with these prior authorization IGs at this point in time. And while the footprint of people publicly talking about their proof points and their production implementations, we've got 30, 60 people coming to calls, 60 people showing up around a Connect-a-thon table, right, to be able to do testing, because people are, really asking and putting this content into RFPs, it's in people's roadmaps because they know it's coming and they want to be defining and driving it. Now, the flip side of that, right, that we talked about is it is hard to figure out where to go first. There are challenges because folks that aren't paying attention don't really understand all of the layers, of what it's going to mean to really stand up and serve all of these different APIs and the different technology partners they're going to need to have in place. I think we sort of have this group of folks that are ahead of everybody that have figured out who their business partners are, understand sort of the business process changes that are going to be able to be enabled and need to happen in order to support this shift to more real-time interaction with your business partners. But I think that, like we say frequently, like the water's warm, right? I think that one of the things is we look at people trying to figure out how to position themselves. We know there are regs coming. You need to be ready for them. If you haven't figured out who you're going first with and who your partners are, you need to do that. And I think more importantly, you can hear from the people on these calls month to month, right, that we host, that we're building the people to do this work in industry. And so you need to identify who are the folks that understand the business processes in your world today and get them sort of versant and aware of what's happening if they're not already engaged out here in industry. First, so you can control and be a part of where we're headed, but also just to make sure that you really are building the folks, because it's really hard to go and hire people to do this work off the street because really it's so net new, right, what we're doing and how we're working together as an industry.
Well, thank you for that. It's definitely provides some business strategy opportunities for organizations to think about how this technology underpins their objectives in the patient care ecosystem. So let's pivot a little bit to the promised topic of CQL. So this is a question for both of you. During our discussions in the proposed rule 0057 and 0053, which is the attachments rule, I recall Hans's remarks about evolving to a state of exchange that provides minimum necessary, high fidelity, granular data. There's also a fair amount of discussion around the use of clinical quality language, or CQL, related to the harmonization effort to align specification development for quality measures and its broader use in data exchange. So we recognize that this is a part of our emerging topics in Da Vinci 2024 plans and possibly a discovery project that we may undertake. So could you offer some context for our attendees first on what is CQL and why should they care, and its interplay with the API exchange and implementer considerations such as data capture workflow changes? So I think, Hans, you want to talk a little bit about CQL and what it is first?
Sure. Let's start with the acronym, clinical quality language, which starts to put us off in a direction that you might say, what does that have to do with what we're talking about here? But it's really the language came about from a perspective of using that to create measure reports, measures to understand what data do I need in order to calculate a particular measure, more on the clinical side. But really, when you look at it, the ability of that is much wider than that purpose, which I think is where that intersection between CQL, what is that? It's a a language FHIR-based effectively to identify a set of data and a set of data sets that you would like to get for a purpose, where the purpose primarily initially was quality measures, where you really can look at and say, well, when I'm trying to do prior auth, when I'm trying to do attachments, when I'm trying to do PDEX, when I'm trying to do CDEX beyond attachments, etc., and I can go beyond Da Vinci, is that there are quite a few queries that you want to say, I'd like to have a set of data that would satisfy my particular need. I need to have, for a patient in support of prior authorization, I need to have some data to help determine whether I can justify it. I need to have a larger data set because I'm doing gaps in care. I need to do a different data set or get a measure out of it for HEDIS or other measures. So I'm constantly trying to define for a particular purpose a set of data that's relevant. I think that's where CQL plays in, that it allows for a much more formal representation of, now, what is it that you're looking for? Not just a simple English sentence that we all get confused around as to, now, did you include this? Or do you mean beds that include licensed bed only? Or what conditions do you truly mean? You have an opportunity to much more formally define what that set is about. And it further then allows you to get much more targeted. So comments like granular or high fidelity, or but more granular and minimum necessary, are around, it is the data set that I need for this purpose. So I think that's where CQL has a tremendously great opportunity beyond what it initially might have been thought of with the word clinical in front of it. It's a way in FHIR context to ask for data. The challenge that we will run into is that there is this promise that says, hey, today I define my CQL, and then I immediately can go after a FHIR server and get that data. And then tomorrow I change my CQL and go get something else. I think part of what we're going to be running into is that to what extent, how dynamic are different parties willing to interact on that basis? How much do I need to predefine that you're going to ask for this set of data for this purpose, that set of data for another purpose, and I'm very aware of that, as opposed to what CQL would allow you to do is just go after it and get the data that you want to. We need to learn what that balance is, but it's all going to come down to then, what is minimum necessary? How detailed do I need to get it? What purpose am I trying to serve? As well as that, at that point in time, regardless of that, CQL helps me better understand what is it that you're looking for. So if I have even other ways of getting to the data, I can use CQL to better communicate, this is what I want in FHIR speak. That's one of the key elements in there that really provides a tremendous amount of value and help tailor it with defined sets of those that we all can agree to for certain use cases, so that it becomes easier for somebody to say, hey, if you ask me this question, happy to answer it because I know exactly what you're going to get.
That's really helpful and very good context, especially when we think about the world of fit for purpose and what that means in an automated landscape. And so, Jocelyn, would you talk a little bit about the role of CQL and maybe your favorite topic of prior authorization?
Yeah, I think this is really important because I think that we could see the promise, right, of leveraging CQL with DTR. And I want to maybe highlight a couple of words I think that I heard Hans say, I heard you reference, and I think come up frequently in this conversation. The first is really getting to that promise of automation, right? What does automation really look like so we don't have people rekeying or validating information? The second is trust. And Hans and I have had many discussions over this, about this over the years, about what is it really going to take for providers and payers to get to full automation from a trading partner agreement. And I'm going to unpack that a little bit. And then the last is, I think there's a question for us in the Da Vinci community is sort of, what is it that we're tackling, right, around sort of the use of CQL from a prior auth perspective, but also within CDEX and also potentially and already with the work that we do from a digital quality measure perspective, and probably across a number of other IGs, right, where we could potentially be leveraging CQL. And so I think the first piece that I guess I think are intertwined, which is this automation and trust, right? We are seeing from an adoption perspective, there are very clearly payers and providers that are in high trust relationships that are highly at risk with each other, right? And so the exchange and the sharing of clinical data between the two businesses is a foregone conclusion, that they trust each other to share the information, to use it wisely, and to be as efficient about it as possible, right? So I think that, the demonstration that we saw last month on Member Forum, which wasn't a public meeting, we promise we will get them to present publicly in the coming weeks with our colleagues at Providence, where they talked about implementing CDEX with their partners at Primera through Apollo, one of the vendors, showed that that was a high trust organization and that they were willing to essentially send a bundle, the equivalent of what you would get in, a full clinical record for a patient to a payer customer, a payer partner, and that they were using CDEX to do that around some of their quality measure work, right, in an automated way. People are going to get to that point. I think that the power of being able to leverage CQL to get to just the data that's needed or that's agreed upon trading partners, right? Really that minimal, meaningful, minimal data that's required for a particular transaction is something that from a business and a trading partner relationship is much more achievable, right? Like that we can agree for this business scenario, for this data set, for this population of members, right, using ATR, we agree that we will share this data and that there won't need to be human intervention involved. And so that's a powerful way to be able to get to that detail. When we look at DTR, right, and the fact that we really have something that's in workflow, that's automatically pulling the information from the EHR, has the capability of doing that, that's really powerful, right? But just like we've spent this time sort of defining work from an implementation guide perspective, I think the question that the community is asking as people are showing up and starting to implement and start to educate themselves on FHIR and start to educate themselves on CQL, sort of what is the role and what could we do to better standardize those particular workflows and those particular data sets or value sets that are going to be required for prior authorization in different scenarios, right? So that we can get to that semantic interoperability, right? What I'm asking for is what you're asking for. I can expect a payer to ask for this type of information, and as the EHR or the provider, I can ensure that data is discoverable and it's semantically correct so that the automation can actually be possible. I don't think we know at this point in time sort of exactly how that's going to look, and that's why you heard, Alix refer to it as a potential discovery project. We have a really mature methodology, I think, from a program perspective of really picking up sort of a topic and trying to figure out how and where Da Vinci should be playing in, because I do think that this idea of standardizing and normalizing how we think about data sets from a disease state perspective or from a treatment program perspective is a really big ocean, right? And I think we need to be really smart about what we sign up for to do from a Da Vinci perspective and how those same data sets are used by other actors in the industry other than just payers and providers. So I think what people will likely see is that we're going to pick up this topic, right? Have I think public discussions at places like ConnectCon, and then really go back from a membership perspective and really figure out what is it that we can do? Where is it should Da Vinci be playing, or sort of the larger FHIR community should be playing? And I don't think we know what that answer is. And I'll toss it back over to Hans to see if he's got any more direct opinions. I think that the promise here is, just like we've used the implementation guides to get to better, concrete, reusable APIs, can we take that same approach around the contents of the data that's going to be requested from a CQL perspective? Are there patterns and data sets and value sets that we can all agree upon? It's not clear to me that we'll be able to do that at a standards level, but from a best practice perspective, and I think that that's where we'll spend our time, but I'm curious to know what Hans thinks.
Yeah, I think on that part, it's going to depend a little bit on the use case that we're in. So if you have high variability, like in a DTR situation for authorization request for a particular procedure, that depending on the health plan that you're interacting with, that you may have different needs for data for whatever the reason is. At that point in time, that might be harder to come to a singular definition. In other areas, it is much easier. So I think it's going to be a very dynamic way. But even then, is that if there is some level of consistency that can be achieved. And we also have to keep in mind is that we're all thinking FHIR in these discussions. We also have to think in terms of non-FHIR that we have for a long time to come, where some of the data sources are are not FHIR-based yet, or at least they might not have a FHIR server in front of them. They could get the data out in some fashion if they had the right information and then provide it back in FHIR format as part of another transport mechanism, but they're not a full-blown FHIR server yet for one reason or the other. And I'm bringing that up because in a non-Da Vinci topic where the same topic of CQL comes up, that happens to be in Helios, where around aggregate data, it is around measures where you're trying to do things. Well, we have to go out to a system that is not quite near a FHIR server yet. Yet CQL can provide tremendous value, again, to the clarity and the position of the information that you want, understanding FHIR. The system that needs to come from can turn around and say, okay, that's what it means for me then, I'll give it back. And if you now can standardize not only on a CQL statement, but you can have a nice code to it, let's say one code, just a big one, which happens to be pursued, that combination of between having a encoded way or a code that can represent a concept, whatever it is, data set, measure, otherwise, and CQL provides the language, and depending on where you are in the path of automation and progression, you can use the CQL directly to get the information through the FHIR server, or for other reasons, you translate it into something different than FHIR because you need to do that internally, or you use the code to say, hey, I know exactly what I do. So it is going to be part of that learning that's out there, and it's going to be important that for prior authorization, as an example, that we start that process on how can we use that best, and how can we optimize, reuse where we can, clarity on what's being asked for, predictability, so that we can in the process build up trust to say that, okay, if this is how it's being asked for, I know that I can respond to it and I don't need to shut you off in order to protect the data because I don't know what you're doing. That's just the extreme part of it. But that's in the end what we're trying to achieve, is that improved automation to make it easier. But that means is that we also have to trust that the question asked is valid, reasonable, it's not going to get more than it needs, and serves the purpose.
I also think it takes making sure that folks are collecting the data and putting it in the expected location so that the workflows and the technologies can work effectively to really enable that trust.
Yeah, and that's actually an interesting point that you bring up, because we also then need to realize is that as you define CQL and as you see how FHIR servers are implemented against a specific data sources, so that you may also find is that the same CQL applied to different FHIR servers is not going to necessarily give you the same answer back. Close, but not exactly. So there are all kinds of things that we need to learn because of the way that everybody implements FHIR servers, the way that CQL is defined, etc. So it is going to be a learning curve, but it has tremendous amount of promise, and we should start sooner rather than later to get on that path.
Well, it does really sound like we're taking the next step into advanced FHIR baseball and capabilities with CQL. So it'll be interesting to see how we evolve that, while we're also supporting the industry community, the industry adopting baseline FHIR specifications and continuing to iterate and mature the specification we already have in flight. So let's talk a little bit about the industry looking towards 2024 and the key areas where Da Vinci will help those industry partners implement. So Jocelyn, I don't know if you want to kick us off in talking about that. I have a couple categories I'm hoping you're going to address.
Yeah, we're going to do all of the things, right? So we're going to keep doing, I think, what we've been doing. And I think that it's paid dividends, right? With the adoption that we're seeing, with the engagement that we're seeing. You know, as I spoke before, I think that we are going to see, a few rules come our way, and probably some stuff at the state level that's happening. And I think through members and through the community, we will comment and provide guidance and feedback as appropriate. We'll continue to do that work. And I think that that's been really powerful. I think that's been sort of an unexpected benefit, I think, of this sort of mashed together group of stakeholders, where we can agree that we can speak as one voice to the industry to give feedback or to give direction, I think has been really powerful. We're going to continue to do the education work that we've been doing, right? So, hey, members, when you're ready to get up and start talking about your stories, Leslie and I are here for you. And supporting our industry colleagues, whether it be participating and engaged in conversations that are happening around some of these topics at places like WEDI or AHIP or, AMA conferences, we're going to do that. You heard Krista lay out, in some places that we've gotten to STU2s, we're kind of taking a breath and letting everybody come and pick up the guides and start using them and be prepared for feedback. In other places, we're doubling down into publish mode or ballot mode in some of our newer guides. I anticipate, that there'll probably be one or two things that we'll pick up. I think CQL is going to be a really interesting discovery piece of work. We have the postable remittance use case in discovery chomping at the bit to get out to public. So, for those of you out in public, you should see that soon. And then I think that, to me, more importantly, I think even in maybe our early days, it was super important. And then we were sort of in our trough, sort of doing our work. I think the working across the different SDOs and the different groups, like testifying at NCVHS and participating through members and implementers to give real world feedback there in high tech, I think has been really important. It is like village building, right? Is what we're doing. The ability for us to leverage not just your work in industry to show that this is working, but also to help other accelerators in other topic areas, as you heard Hans talking about, some of the promise of what's happening with from a health, a public policy perspective and public health perspective, really be able to, help build the tools, Codex building on top of our prior authorization guides, I think has been really powerful. My earbuds have decided they're done staying in my ears at this point in time for the evening, so I think that means we must be getting to the end. But I think that we're going to keep doing what we're doing, and we're here for people to get as engaged or active as they want to be, and we look forward to sort of helping to sort out with members, what is sort of beyond topics like CQL and postable remittance. What else is out there that we should be tackling, and what gets sort of unwound as we keep working through real world implementation and learn where the gaps and the noise are, and the blank areas that we need to better define in the guides that we've already built.
Yeah, and I think one area to further drill a little bit deeper what Jocelyn mentioned. When we look at what's going to happen as all these rules are going to drop, we'll find out that some of the guides that we wrote that we have had early implementations in, now a larger group of parties are going to pick it up and say, well, that was great, but we need to so this iteration round of improving, understanding how it now actually works under a regulatory environment is going to be important. We've seen that, well, from a HIPAA perspective, you can go back all the way to late 90s, early 2000. That took time to get into that cadence. Now this is a new area in some ways. You're going to see that there as well. With what we have seen from a certified software perspective, we have seen that, okay, that was round one, looked great. Now we need to fix some things and we need to enhance it. So that iterative process is going to be there in part because of we learn new things functionally, but we're also going to learn as to, hey, what's the best way to interact with regulations? And that is not only going to be how software needs to be advanced and standards need to be advanced, but also how regulations need to be fine-tuned, and therefore providing that feedback on how we can do that would be fantastic. And it's kind of interesting, Alix, that you bring up that slide right now. The left-hand side reminds me a little bit of when I started in this space of standards and whatnot. That goes back a couple of decades. I started with the begin, and then I noticed that when you look at the chart, there is no end there. There is no stop. You keep on going. So once you start to begin, you keep on rotating through that. I'm still stuck in that rotation there, I guess, after a couple of decades. But that's really what it's about, because one round is not going to do it. It's an ongoing process and interaction to make it happen.
And thank you for calling that out, because that is one point I think we could make on this slide. The other one I think I could offer here is that as you've been hearing our approaches in Da Vinci for testing and iteration and maturing, so are the processes and methodologies of HL7 overarching to help the entire community as we move forward. So it's part of also ensuring that we continue to advance the tools and the resources, not just from the Da Vinci Project, but also from HL7 proper, and also the collaboration that we're going to be doing with and have been doing with other accelerators. And I'm particularly excited to see how the infrastructure resources within the Fire at Scale task force are going to continue to advance and help the ecosystem, including adding their discovery project into a formal project next year for consent. So it's a lot of iterating together across the community to really make sure that we all have the knowledge, the tools, the resources, and the network, the human network, to help us solve the problems. Because once we tackle one thing, we're going to create something new, and then that's going to create new problems. And it's a forever lather, rinse, repeat model. And the golden part of it all is that it gets better and we become more efficient. And sometimes we're in the middle of the process, we don't see that whole progress that we've made, and the impact that we've had ultimately to get to the end goal, which is to deliver better patient care and have better health outcomes for communities and for the people that take care of our patients and their caregivers. We need to reduce burden and let them function at their highest, best capacity. So I realize now it's the bottom of the hour, and so we'll save some of these questions for a future roundtable. And I want to thank everybody for participating and listening to our year-end review and forecast for what's coming in 24. So we look forward to seeing you on January 24th, 2024, and ask that if you have a moment to complete our brief survey to give us feedback, because we take it seriously and apply it to how we do programming for the future. With that, happy holidays. Hope everyone is safe, and we look forward to seeing you next year.
Take care.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm thankful for all of you guys. Thank you so much.
Well said.